Chapter 4. In which dreams prove dangerously literal. Aldrich was dreaming. He knew he was dreaming because the princess from the bathhouse was there, and she was beautiful in the way that dream people often are, perfect and luminous and not quite real. Her skin seemed to glow in the soft light, her eyes were impossibly deep, and when she turned to look at him, he felt something in his chest tighten. Then she screamed. The sound echoed through the dream, high and terrified, and Aldrich tried to reach for her, to help, to understand what was wrong. He woke up, naked, in a bed that was not his bed at the inn. This bed was enormous, draped in silk and velvet, in a room painted in soft creams and golds. Morning light streamed through windows hung with gauzy curtains, and pointing directly at him, held by men in royal livery, were approximately a dozen spears. "Don't move," one of the guards shouted. Aldrich, frozen in shock, did not move. To his right, also in the bed, also most definitely not dressed, the Princess Celestine was cowering against the headboard, clutching the sheets to her chest, her face white with terror. "Oh no," Aldrich whispered. "Sorcerer," another guard bellowed. "Step away from Her Highness!" Aldrich's hand moved on pure instinct. He slapped the mattress with his palm. "Get me out of here!" The world twisted, a nauseating spiral that felt like being wrung out like a wet cloth, and he vanished in what the guards would later describe as a puff of eldritch smoke. He reappeared in his room at the Wayward Traveller, still naked, landing on his significantly less luxurious bed with a thump that knocked the wind from his lungs. For several seconds, he simply lay there, breathing heavily, staring at the ceiling. "So I have to keep track of my thoughts now, too?" He said aloud to the empty room. "What else can possibly go wrong?" He sat up slowly, retrieved his scattered clothes from the chair where he'd left them, and began dressing with shaking hands. He'd dreamed about the princess, just dreamed about her. And somehow, his abilities had taken that dream and made it horrifyingly, catastrophically real. He'd appeared in her bed, in the palace. Naked, surrounded by guards. If they caught him, he would be executed. Slowly, probably. And this time, he would absolutely deserve it. Aldrich finished buttoning his shirt and sat down heavily at the table. His top hat sat there, innocent and still. "You're becoming a problem," he told it. The hat offered no response. He picked it up and examined it. The silk top hat was distinctive, too distinctive, really. It marked him as either nobility or someone pretending to be nobility, neither of which was helpful. "If only I could change how this looked," he muttered. The hat shivered in his hands. The transformation was smooth and immediate, the silk flattening, the brim widening, the whole shape compressing into something smaller and more manageable. When it finished, he was holding a flat cap, the sort an English gentleman might wear to the races. Practical, understated, respectable, without being ostentatious. Aldrich stared at it. "Well, that's convenient." He placed it on his head and picked up his cane, looking at the silver fox handle. "I wonder if you can change too?" The cane trembled. The handle shifted, the three-dimensional fox flattening and spreading, transforming into an intricate engraved portrait of a sleeping fox that ran along the length of the cane's upper shaft. The handle itself became a simple rounded knob, the sort commonly seen on walking sticks in America. The fox in the portrait was still asleep, but Aldrich had the distinct impression it was very much aware of everything happening around it. "Right," he said. "Thank you, I suppose." He needed to get out of the inn, out of this part of the city, preferably out of Lorendale entirely for a while, until the chaos at the palace died down. The Adventurers' Guild seemed like the best option. Helena looked up as he entered, and her expression suggested she'd heard something about the morning's palace incident, but wasn't quite sure what to make of it. "Mr. Pemberton," she said cautiously, "you're looking well." "I need a quest," Aldrich said. "Something that takes me out of the city. For several days, preferably." "Running from something?" "Avoiding misunderstandings," Aldrich corrected. Helena studied him for a moment, then shuffled through her papers. "The Guildmaster has actually been looking for someone for a special assignment. Rank advancement quest. You'd go from F rank to E rank upon completion." "What does it entail?" "Escort duty. Take a merchant named Garrett from here to Millbrook. That's about 500 kilometers southwest. Help him collect barrels of wine, grain, and other goods. Stay there for 3 days, then escort him back. protection duty the whole way. Millbrook, where he'd first arrived in this world, there was a certain symmetry to that. "I'll take it," Aldrich said. Helena wrote out the quest details. "Garrett's waiting in the courtyard. He's been asking for someone reliable. The roads have been dangerous lately. Bandits, mostly." "I'll do my best. One more thing," Helena added as he turned to go. "The guildmaster wanted me to mention, if you complete this successfully, you'll need to register your actual abilities. No more leaving that section blank." Aldrich nodded, though he had no idea how he'd explain what he could do in terms the guild would accept. Garrett turned out to be a pleasant man in his 40s with a weathered face and a good-natured disposition. His wagon was already loaded with trade goods, pulled by 2 sturdy horses. "You're my escort?" he asked, looking Aldrich up and down. "No offense, but you don't look much like an adventurer." "I'm full of surprises," Aldrich assured him. "Shall we depart?" The journey began smoothly enough. The road south from Lorendale was well maintained, winding through farmland and scattered forest. Garrett kept up a steady stream of conversation, mostly complaints about taxes, observations about the weather, and speculation about grain prices. When evening came and they made camp, Aldrich faced his first real problem. He had no idea how to cook. He'd never needed to learn. His wife had handled it when she was alive, and after her death, he'd subsisted on purchased meals and simple toast. Garrett was building a fire and unpacking provisions when Aldrich wandered to the edge of their campsite, tapped his cane against the ground, and thought very specifically, "We need a proper dinner. Something hot and filling for 2 people." The ground rippled. A table rose from the earth. Not the small tea table from before, but a proper dining table with a white cloth and lit candles. 2 chairs followed, positioning themselves neatly. And on the table, steaming dishes appeared. Roasted chicken, potatoes, vegetables in herb butter, fresh bread, and a bottle of wine. Aldrich turned to find Garrett staring, his mouth hanging open. "Dinner's ready," Aldrich said mildly. "You're a sorcerer," Garrett whispered. "I'm just a man." "Just a man doesn't make tables appear out of the ground." "I'm a man with unusual tools," Aldrich amended. "Please, eat before it gets cold." Garrett ate, but his eyes never left Aldrich for long. When the meal finished, and Aldrich thought about clearing up, the table, chairs, and dishes all sank back into the earth, as though they'd never been. "Intense magic," Garrett breathed. "You're some kind of grand sorcerer, aren't you? Traveling in disguise?" "I'm a retired accountant from London," Aldrich said patiently. "I simply have access to certain conveniences." Garrett didn't believe him. Aldrich could see it in his eyes. The merchant had decided that Aldrich was a powerful wizard traveling incognito, and nothing would shake that conviction. The next 2 days proceeded similarly. Morning breakfast appeared on summoned tables: eggs, bacon, fresh fruit, hot tea. Evening dinners were equally elaborate. Garrett praised the food extravagantly, though Aldrich felt like a fraud, accepting the compliments for meals he hadn't actually prepared. They encountered no bandits, no monsters, no difficulties of any kind. The roads were clear, the weather was pleasant, and Garrett's horses maintained a steady pace. It was, in fact, suspiciously easy. On the morning of the 3rd day, they crested a hill and saw Millbrook spread out in the valley below. The village looked exactly as Aldrich remembered it. Pastoral cottages, the inn with its sleeping cat sign, smoke rising from chimneys in those perfect spirals. "Here we are," Garrett said cheerfully. "Now we just need to load up the goods, wait 3 days for the wine to be properly sealed, and head back. Easy money, eh?" "Indeed," Aldrich agreed, though he was looking at the village with a peculiar sense of recognition. He'd started here, knocked on a London street, and ended up in this meadow, confused and disoriented. Now he was returning, having accidentally killed 13 men, repaired an orphanage, and apparently developed the ability to teleport into princesses' bedrooms while sleeping. Progress, of a sort. They descended into the village, and Aldrich thought about the 3 days ahead. 3 days to rest, to think, to perhaps gain better control over abilities that seemed determined to cause chaos. 3 quiet, uneventful days. He should have known better than to hope for that. Chapter 4, in which dreams prove dangerously literal. Part 2. Millbrook was exactly as Aldrich remembered it, perhaps too exactly. The cottages sat in their perfect arrangements, the flowers bloomed in their aggressive colours, and the sky maintained its subtle wrongness that he'd learned not to examine too closely. Garrett steered the wagon toward the village square, where several merchants were already conducting business. "I'll need to meet with the winemaker and the grain supplier," he explained. "Should take most of the day to sort out the paperwork and quality checks. You're free to explore, if you like." "I think I will," Aldrich said, climbing down from the wagon. The drowsy Mauser stood exactly where it had before, its painted cat still curled around its crescent moon. The innkeeper, the grey-haired woman who'd offered him free lodging on his first night, was sweeping the front steps. She looked up as he approached and went very still. "You came back," she said quietly. "By accident, the first time," Aldrich admitted. "By assignment, this time. I'm escorting a merchant." "And you've learned what you are?" The question was loaded with meaning. Aldrich didn't quite understand. "I'm learning," he said carefully. "It's an ongoing process." She leaned on her broom and studied him. "The ones who knock on thresholds are rare. Most don't survive long enough to understand what they've been given. They open the wrong door, step through to somewhere that shouldn't be stepped to, and—" She made a gesture like smoke dispersing. "That's comforting," Aldrich said dryly. "It's honest." She corrected. "You're still here, which means you're either lucky or careful. Try to be more of the latter." She returned to her sweeping, and Aldrich continued into the village. He found himself wandering toward the notice board in the square, the same one he'd seen on his first day, covered in papers he hadn't been able to read. Now, his mental butler helpfully translated them. Requests for help with harvests, warnings about wolves in the forest, an announcement about a village festival, and a royal proclamation. The paper was newer than the others, the ink still dark. At the top was an official seal and a portrait of King Aldous III, a stern-faced man with a pointed beard and a crown that looked uncomfortably heavy. Aldrich stared at the portrait. The king's eyes seemed to stare back. For just a moment, Aldrich felt a strange pull, like standing at the edge of a cliff and feeling the irrational urge to jump. He closed his eyes, trying to shake off the sensation. When he opened them, he was no longer in the village square. He was standing in an enormous throne room, vaulted ceilings stretched overhead, held up by marble columns, tapestries depicting battles and coronations hung on the walls. And directly in front of him, seated on a throne of carved wood and gold, was King Aldous III, the same man from the portrait, looking directly at him. Around the throne room, at least 20 knights in full armor turned as one. "That's him!" one of them shouted, pointing. "That's the man from the princess's chambers!" The king rose to his feet, his face darkening. "Seize." "I don't want to be here," Aldrich said desperately, raising his cane. He tapped it against the marble floor. To the knights and the king, he vanished in a cloud of pink smoke, a peculiar detail that would be debated by palace scholars for years to come. To Aldrich, the world shifted with nauseating speed, reality folding in on itself like origami in reverse. He stumbled back into existence in the village square, directly in front of the notice board, staring at the same portrait of the king. His hands were shaking. "I've got to start keeping track of what I'm doing in my head," he muttered. "Otherwise, I'm going to ruin my own life." He turned away from the notice board, carefully not looking at any more portraits or official seals, and nearly collided with a small child. The same child from his first visit, actually. The one with the wooden sword. "You're back," the child observed. "Did you figure out where you were going?" "I'm working on it," Aldrich said weakly. "You don't look very good. Are you sick?" "Just tired. It's been a very strange few days." The child considered this with the serious expression children sometimes adopt when they're thinking about adult problems they don't quite understand. "My mum says when you're tired, you should have tea and a biscuit." "Your mother is a wise woman," Aldrich said. He made his way back to the drowsy Mauser, where the innkeeper took one look at his face and poured him a cup of something hot and herbal without asking. "Rough morning?" she asked. "I accidentally teleported into the king's throne room while looking at his portrait," Aldrich said. "They recognized me from the princess's bedroom." The innkeeper paused mid-pour. "The princess's bedroom?" "I appeared there by accident, while sleeping. Twice, actually, if you count this morning." "And you're still alive?" "I'm very good at leaving quickly." She set the teapot down and sat across from him. Listen carefully. Your ability, answered knock, threshold courtesy, whatever you want to call it, it responds to intention, not just conscious intention. Dreams, idle thoughts, wandering attention. If you look at a picture and think, I wonder what that place is like, you might end up there. That would have been useful information several catastrophes ago, Aldrich said. Most people figure it out before they teleport into royal bedchambers, she said dryly. You need to learn to control your thoughts, to separate curiosity from intention, to build walls between I wonder and I want. How? Practice, meditation. Some use mantras, some visualize locks on doors. The specifics don't matter. What matters is that you stop accidentally knocking on every threshold you happen to think about. Aldrich sipped his tea. It tasted of lavender and something else, something that made his thoughts feel slightly clearer, less scattered. The fox on your cane, the innkeeper continued. It's a guardian, isn't it? A limiter? It seems to decide what I can and cannot show to people, Aldrich confirmed. Then it's trying to protect you. From yourself as much as others. Listen to it. When it stops you from doing something, there's usually a reason. It let me appear in the princess's bedroom, Aldrich pointed out. Maybe you needed to learn that lesson the hard way. She stood and refilled his cup. 3 days in Millbrook, you said? That's the plan. Use them wisely. Practice controlling your thoughts. Learn to knock only when you mean to knock. Because sooner or later, you're going to think about somewhere you really shouldn't go, and the fox will be able to stop it. She left him to his tea. Aldrich sat in the quiet common room, watching dust motes drift through sunlight, and tried to empty his mind. It was remarkably difficult. Every time he relaxed, his thoughts wandered, to London and his flat, to Timothy and Christmas dinners, to the princess's face in the bathhouse, in his dream, in the bed this morning. Each thought felt like standing at the edge of a door, hand raised to knock. He set down his teacup and retrieved his cane. The engraved fox along its length appeared to be sleeping, but Aldrich knew better now. Help me, he said quietly. Please, show me how to control this. The fox's eyes opened, just barely, just enough to show a glint of silver. Then it closed them again. But something had changed. Aldrich could feel it, a presence in his mind, not quite separate from himself, but not quite the same either. Like having a passenger in one's thoughts, gently steering. When his mind started to wander toward the palace, toward the king, toward anywhere dangerous, he felt the gentlest pressure. Not a wall, but a suggestion. Perhaps not that direction. Thank you, Aldrich whispered. The fox naturally said nothing, but its presence remained, warm and steady, as Aldrich finished his tea and prepared to face the rest of the day. That evening, when Garrett returned from his business negotiations, Aldrich summoned their dinner as usual. The table rose from the ground, the candles lit themselves, and the food appeared in steaming dishes. Garrett had stopped questioning it. He simply sat down, filled his plate, and ate with the appreciation of a man who'd spent the day arguing about barrel quality and grain moisture content. 3 more days, he said cheerfully. Then it's back to Lorendale with a full wagon and a nice profit. This has been the easiest escort job I've ever had. Don't say that, Aldrich said automatically. You'll jinx it. Jinx it? We haven't seen a single bandit, the weather's been perfect, and I've got a sorcerer who can conjure gourmet meals out of thin air. What could possibly go wrong? Aldrich looked at him, looked at the sky, looked at his cane. The fox, he was quite certain, was laughing at him. Let's just, Aldrich said carefully, maintain a reasonable level of caution for the remaining 3 days. If you insist, Garrett said, reaching for more potatoes. But honestly, I think we're in the clear. Aldrich didn't respond. He was too busy practicing keeping his thoughts under control, making sure he didn't accidentally look at anything, or anyone, that might trigger another unintended journey. 3 more days in Millbrook, 3 days to learn control. 3 days before returning to a city where he was now wanted for appearing in the princess's bedroom, and possibly for whatever chaos he'd caused in the throne room. Simple, really. The fox's presence in his mind felt distinctly amused. Aldrich sighed and ate his dinner, trying very hard not to think about anything at all. Chapter 4, in which dreams prove dangerously literal, Part 3. The next morning, after summoning breakfast for both himself and Garrett, who had stopped questioning the magical appearances and now simply accepted them as the privileges of traveling with a grand sorcerer, Aldrich retreated to his room at the Drowsy Mouser. He sat in a comfortable chair that materialized from the floor at his unspoken request, sinking into the cushions with a sigh. "I'll stay here for most of the day," he said aloud to no one in particular. "Maybe read a book. Keep my thoughts under control." His mind began to wander. Dangerous territory, he now knew, but difficult to prevent. He thought about London, about his childhood, about Christmas mornings and holidays. Simple, happy memories from before everything became complicated. He remembered sitting on Father Christmas's lap at Harrods when he was 5, the excitement and wonder of it. It would be nice to sit in a chair like that again, he thought idly, like a throne, comfortable and important. Then, unbidden, another thought drifted in. What would it be like to sit in a chair like the king's throne, with that beautiful princess in my lap? Aldrich slapped himself in the head. Hard. "I shouldn't be thinking of stuff like this," he muttered. "I'll get myself into even more trouble." He leaned his head back against the chair and closed his eyes, trying to empty his mind completely. At first, he felt nothing. Then something warm settled onto his lap, and something distinctly chilly touched his skin. Aldrich's eyes snapped open. King Aldous III stood 3 feet in front of him, his face frozen in absolute shock. Behind him, the throne room, the actual royal throne room, was filled with at least 30 nobles and courtiers, all dressed in their finest. The warmth on Aldrich's lap shifted, and he looked down. Princess Celestine sat there, her hands desperately trying to cover herself. Because neither of them was wearing any clothing whatsoever, she screamed. Aldrich stood up without thinking, and the princess tumbled to the floor. She scrambled to stand, and for one horrible moment, her entire form was visible to every noble in the room. The king's face went purple with rage. He lunged forward, hands reaching for Aldrich's throat. "I'll kill you myself!" Aldrich had no cane, no hat, nothing but his own naked body and pure panic. He stomped his foot twice on the marble floor. "Get me out of here!" He vanished in a plume of yellow smoke just as the king's hands clapped together on empty air. The king immediately stripped off his robe and threw it over his daughter, then bellowed at the assembled nobles. "Clear the room, now!" When the throne room was empty, save for his most trusted guards, the king spoke in a voice that shook with fury. "That sorcerer is a menace to society. I want him arrested immediately. Find him. I don't care what it takes. Find him." Within the hour, wanted posters began appearing across the kingdom. Wanted, dangerous sorcerer, for repeated invasion of royal chambers, for assault upon the dignity of Princess Celestine, for public indecency and use of forbidden magic. Reward, 10,000 gold alive and bound. Aldrich did not reappear in his room. He reappeared, still naked, in a bathtub. A bathtub currently occupied by a young woman with dark hair and kind eyes, who had been praying fervently to the goddess of the open sky moments before. "Please," she'd been whispering, "send me a husband, someone who will love me and care for me. Someone good and—" Aldrich appeared in the water with a splash. The woman screamed. Then she looked at him, really looked, and her expression changed from terror to wonder. "You heard me," she breathed. The goddess heard me. She grabbed him, pulling him into a hug. Thank you for sending me my husband." "I'm not," Aldrich sputtered. "I didn't. This is a mistake." The bathroom door burst open. A middle-aged woman, the girl's mother, presumably, took one look at the naked man in the bath with her daughter and screamed. She grabbed a broom and swung it at Aldrich's head. He vanished just before it connected, reappearing in his room at the inn, fully clothed, sitting in his chair, as though nothing had happened. He looked down at his cane. The silver fox engraved along its length was laughing. Actually, visibly laughing, rolled onto its back, legs kicking in the air, clearly delighted with itself. "You did that on purpose," Aldrich said flatly. The fox continued laughing silently. "This isn't funny. People are dying because of these accidents. The princess is traumatized. The king wants to kill me. And you think it's a joke." The fox settled down slightly, but still looked distinctly amused. Aldrich stood, gripping the cane tightly. "It's not just my magic, is it? You control a good portion of what happens to me. You're the one deciding where I end up when things go wrong." The fox's eyes opened briefly, acknowledging the truth. then closed again. Aldrich took a deep breath and headed for the door. He needed to get out, clear his head, do something productive that didn't involve accidentally teleporting into anyone's private chambers. He opened the door just in time to hear a woman's voice screaming in the street. "Some man just appeared in my daughter's tub! Where is he? I'll kill him!" Aldrich very quietly closed the door. He walked through the inn, exited through the back door instead, and made his way carefully toward the village's small guild outpost. He needed work, something to occupy his mind and hands, something that would keep him too busy to have wandering thoughts. The quest board held several options. His eye caught on one. Barn construction needed, 75 silver, must complete within 2 days. Perfect. Physical labor, no thinking required, just building. He took the quest card and followed the directions to a farm on the village outskirts. The farmer, a weathered man named Edmund, showed him the work site, foundation already laid, lumber stacked and waiting, tools organized nearby. "Think you can handle it?" Edmund asked skeptically, looking at Aldrich's fine clothes and clean hands. "I'll manage," Aldrich said. Edmund left him to it. Aldrich looked at the lumber, the tools, the sheer scope of the project, and realized he had absolutely no idea how to build a barn. "I could use a little help," he said to the open air, half joking. The ground opened. An elevator rose up, an actual elevator, wooden and mechanical, rising from beneath the earth as though it had always been there. The doors opened. Out stepped a dozen men with long beards and black hats, dressed in simple work clothes. They nodded to Aldrich, shook his hand one by one, and immediately set to work with the practiced efficiency of master craftsmen. A young woman, pretty, in a simple dress, emerged last, carrying a tray with a pitcher of lemonade and a glass. She poured one for Aldrich, smiled, and gestured to a chair that had appeared under a nearby tree. "Sit," she said kindly. "We'll handle this." Aldrich sat. He watched as the bearded men worked with impossible speed and precision. Walls went up, roof beams were positioned, shingles were laid. The barn took shape before his eyes, far more elaborate and beautiful than the simple structure Edmund had requested. Edmund himself stood on his porch, mouth hanging open, watching the impossible construction. By late afternoon, the barn was complete, a masterpiece of craftsmanship with carved details, perfect joints, and structural integrity that would last generations. The workers packed up their tools, returned to the elevator, and shook Aldrich's hand again. The young woman gave him a kiss on the cheek, collected the pitcher and glass, then paused. "Oh, nearly forgot this." She darted into the barn, retrieved something, Aldrich couldn't see what, and returned to the elevator. All of them descended. The ground closed over the elevator shaft as though it had never been. Edmund walked over slowly, running his hand along the barn's wall. This is incredible. I was expecting something basic, but this is art. The 75 silver doesn't seem like enough." "It's quite enough," Aldrich assured him. "I'm glad you're pleased." He collected the payment and decided to walk back to the village rather than use magic. Walking would give him time to think, to process, to maybe gain some clarity. The walk did not provide clarity, because Aldrich's thoughts kept drifting back to the princess. Not intentionally, he was actively trying not to think about her, but the harder he tried not to think about something, the more present it became in his mind. In the palace, Princess Celestine stood in a private bathing chamber, one of the most secure rooms in the entire castle, with guards posted outside and doors that locked from the inside. She was trying to wash away the horror of what had happened. Being grabbed by that sorcerer, appearing naked in front of the entire court, the shame and violation of it all. She was crying as she scrubbed her skin, trying to feel clean again. The guards outside the door stood at attention, determined that nothing would disturb her this time. Inside the bathing chamber, the door locked with an audible click. Princess Celestine froze. She looked at the door. She hadn't locked it. She was in the water. Then she felt it, the presence of someone else in the room. She turned. Aldrich stood there, fully clothed, looking absolutely horrified. "Oh crap," he said. "Not again." He stomped his foot. "Take me back!" He vanished in a puff of blue smoke. The guards outside, hearing the princess scream, threw their weight against the door. It took all of them to break through the lock. They burst in to find Princess Celestine in the water, naked and sobbing, completely alone. 14 guards had now seen the princess unclothed. When the king heard what happened, he sat on his throne with his head in his hands. "I know it wasn't their fault," he said quietly, "but I cannot let them live. Not after seeing my daughter like that. The law is clear." All 14 were executed by sunset. "If this keeps happening," the king said aloud, staring at nothing, "I'll have no soldiers left in this kingdom. Somebody find that sorcerer. I want to kill him myself." Aldrich reappeared in the middle of Millbrook's main street. "There he is," a woman's voice shrieked. Aldrich turned to see the mother from the bathtub incident pointing at him. Behind her, her daughter was running forward, arms outstretched. "Husband," the girl called joyfully. Aldrich ran. He rounded a corner and dove through the nearest door, a tavern, he hoped, where he could hide in the crowd. The world shifted as he crossed the threshold. He found himself in a bar, but not the one he'd been aiming for. This one was completely different. Larger, more crowded, filled with people speaking in accents he didn't recognize. He looked out the window. Different buildings, different street, different everything. 300 miles away, his mental butler supplied helpfully. Current location, the town of Greywater. Outside, the mother and daughter ran past where the door had been, looking confused. Aldrich sat down heavily at the bar and ordered a beer. The bartender poured it without comment, apparently unconcerned by patrons who appeared out of nowhere. Aldrich drank slowly, thinking about how horrible this adventure had become. 27 men were now dead because of him. He was wanted for 10,000 gold. A young woman thought he was her goddess-sent husband, and the silver fox on his cane thought all of it was hilarious. "How scared should I be?" he asked his beer, "about what's just around the corner?" The beer, wisely, offered no answer. Aldrich finished it, ordered another, and tried very hard not to think about anything at all. The fox, sleeping peacefully on his cane, looked distinctly satisfied with the day's chaos. Chapter 4, in which dreams proved dangerously literal. Part 4. Aldrich spent the night in Greywater, 300 miles from where he was supposed to be, in a rented room above the bar. He paid with some of his silver, locked the door, wedged a chair under the handle for good measure, and lay very still in bed with his hands clasped on his chest. He did not move. He did not let his thoughts wander. He focused on his breathing and nothing else. When morning came and he was still in the same bed in the same room, he considered it a victory. Getting back to Millbrook proved surprisingly simple. He stepped out of the tavern, carefully, intentionally, thinking very specifically about where he wanted to go, and the threshold delivered him to the outskirts of Millbrook just as the sun was rising. Garrett was already awake, checking the horses and preparing for their departure the following day. "There you are," he said cheerfully. "I was starting to worry. Heard there was some commotion in town yesterday, something about a sorcerer appearing in people's baths." "Mistaken identity," Aldrich said quickly. "I was working on that barn project all day." "Right, the barn. Edmund came by last night raving about it, said it was the finest structure he'd ever seen, built by magic in a single afternoon." Garrett gave him a knowing look. "You really are a grand sorcerer, aren't you?" "Traveling in disguise." "I'm really just a man with unusual circumstances," Aldrich said, which was becoming his standard response. Garrett laughed and clapped him on the shoulder. "Well, unusual or not, I'm glad you're on my side. One more day here, then we load up and head back to Lorendale tomorrow morning." One more day. Aldrich could manage one more day without causing any catastrophes. Surely. He spent the morning helping Garrett organize the goods they'd be transporting. Barrels of wine, sacks of grain, crates of preserved fruits and vegetables. It was honest, physical work that required attention but not deep thought, and Aldrich found it almost meditative. They broke for lunch at a small cafe in the village square. Aldrich carefully avoided looking at any portraits, official seals, or decorative artwork that might feature people. He kept his eyes on his food and his thoughts firmly in the present moment. "You seem tense," Garrett observed. "Just focused," Aldrich said, "making sure everything is properly secured for the journey." "The journey's going to be fine. Same route back, same clear weather. What could go wrong?" "Please stop saying that," Aldrich said. The afternoon passed quietly. Aldrich took a walk around the village. carefully maintaining his mental discipline. When he saw the innkeeper sweeping her steps, she gave him an approving nod. "Better," she said simply. "I'm trying." "Keep trying. The first year is the hardest. After that, it becomes second nature." "The first year?" Aldrich repeated weakly. "You didn't think you'd master threshold magic in a few days, did you?" She shook her head. "Most take years to gain full control. Some never do. You're doing well, all things considered. I've accidentally killed 27 people." Her expression softened. "I know. I heard. But you didn't mean to, and you're learning from it. That counts for something." Aldrich wasn't sure he agreed, but he appreciated the attempt at comfort. Evening came peacefully. Garrett had retired to his own room at a different inn. He'd wanted to visit some friends in the village, so Aldrich ate dinner alone. His table summoning magic provided a simple meal: roast chicken, vegetables, bread, and tea. He ate slowly, watching the sunset through the window. The sky did its peculiar wrong-shaped thing as it transitioned to twilight, and Aldrich had learned not to examine it too closely. When he finished, the table sank back into the floor, and he changed into his nightshirt. The bed was comfortable, not as luxurious as the one in his cottage on the pillar, but pleasant enough. Aldrich climbed in, positioned himself carefully in the center, and closed his eyes. "Stay here," he thought firmly. "In this bed, in this room, nowhere else." Sleep came slowly, but it came. Sometime in the deep hours of the night, Aldrich rolled over in his sleep. His hand, moving unconsciously, tapped the pillow. The world shifted. Aldrich woke to the feeling of different sheets, silk instead of cotton, and a different mattress beneath him. The room was dark, but he could sense its size, its grandeur. This was not his room at the inn. He opened his eyes. A face loomed above him, illuminated by moonlight streaming through enormous windows. King Aldous III's face. The king was in bed, his own bed, in his own royal chambers, and had apparently woken to find a strange man lying next to him. Their eyes met. The king's mouth opened to scream. "No, no, no, no!" Aldrich tapped the sheets frantically. He vanished in a cloud of pink smoke, just as the king's scream filled the royal bedchamber. Aldrich landed back in his bed at the inn, heart hammering, breathing hard. Outside his door, he could hear footsteps running in the hallway, voices calling out in alarm. What was that noise? Sounded like it came from outside. Check the square. Aldrich lay very, very still, staring at the ceiling. "Tomorrow," he whispered to the darkness, "we're leaving, first thing in the morning, and I'm never ever rolling over in my sleep again." The silver fox on his cane, propped against the bedside table, opened one eye briefly. If Aldrich didn't know better, he'd swear it was smirking. In the palace, 300 miles away, King Aldous III sat bolt upright in his bed, surrounded by guards who'd responded to his scream. "He was here," the king shouted. "In my bed. That sorcerer was lying right next to me." The guards searched every corner of the royal chambers. They found nothing. The king sat on the edge of his bed, head in his hands. "Increase the reward," he said quietly. 20,000 gold. I want that man found, bound, and brought before me. I want to look him in the eyes before I execute him personally. The wanted posters were updated before dawn. Chapter 5, in which faces change and identity becomes flexible. The morning after the incident in the king's bed, Aldrich woke with a thought that had been building in his mind like pressure in a kettle. I am in so much trouble. If only there was a way I could be me, but someone else at the same time. The thought settled into his consciousness and stayed there, growing heavier with each passing moment. He couldn't shake it. 20,000 gold on his head. Wanted posters everywhere. The king himself wanted to execute him personally. He needed to not be Aldrich Pemberton anymore. But he also couldn't stop being himself. The contradiction sat in his mind like a puzzle with no solution, turning over and over as he prepared for the day. Garrett was already loading the wagon, humming cheerfully, completely unaware that his escort was the most wanted man in the kingdom. Aldrich decided to take a bath before they departed, one last moment of cleanliness before 3 days on the road. The inn's washroom was private and quiet, and he sank into the warm water with relief. He thought about his problem while he bathed. Be me, but someone else. Someone the guards wouldn't recognize. Someone who could move freely. The water grew cool. He stood, reached for a towel, and caught sight of himself in the mirror. Then he screamed. Where he had once had a flat, modestly muscular chest, he now had a toned body with decidedly feminine curves. What had hung between his legs was now not. She stared at her reflection in absolute horror. The face was similar but softer. The same grey eyes, but framed with longer lashes. The same features, but refined into something unmistakably female. And quite beautiful, if she was being honest. Which she was not ready to be. The door burst open. 2 women from the inn staff rushed in, weapons raised, one with a broom, one with a fire poker. "Where is he?" one of them shouted. "What did that scoundrel do to you?" Aldrich, now very much not Aldrich, turned around, still naked, and both women gasped. "Miss, are you all right? Where's the sorcerer?" Her voice came out higher, lighter. "I'm fine. It wasn't the sorcerer. Please, just leave." "But we heard you scream." "I'm fine. Please go." They left reluctantly, and one posted a guard outside the door, for her safety. Aldrich looked down at herself again and whispered, "What have I done?" She dried off and reached for her clothes, only to find they'd changed as well. No longer trousers and a jacket, but a flowing sundress in soft yellow, with pink polka dots and tiny embroidered sunshines. Simple heels, about 4 inches high, sat beside the dress. And instead of her flat cap, a sun hat with a wide brim and matching pink ribbons. Her cane had become an umbrella, delicate and feminine, with the same silver fox on the handle. The fox opened its eyes, looked at her, and blew a kiss. "This is your doing," she said accusingly. The fox nodded, smirked, and went back to sleep. Aldrich, she still thought of herself as Aldrich, despite everything, got dressed with fumbling fingers. The dress fit perfectly. The heels were surprisingly comfortable. The hat settled on her now longer hair, as though it belonged there. She looked in the mirror one more time, and saw a young woman, perhaps 19 or 20, pretty and respectable, and completely unrecognizable as the wanted sorcerer. Well, she'd wanted to be someone else. Garrett was checking the wagon's axles when she approached. He looked up, saw her, and his expression went soft with admiration. "Oh, good morning, miss. Can I help you with something?" "Don't say that to me," Aldrich said, her voice still that unfamiliar, higher pitch. "I'm sorry. Did I offend you somehow?" "It's me, Aldrich." Garrett blinked. "You what?" She put her hand to her face. "It's me, Aldrich, your escort. You can do that too?" Garrett stared at her. "Change your whole... everything?" "Apparently. Let's just get in the cart and head home." "Right. Yes, of course." He offered his hand to help her up into the wagon, and his hand accidentally lingered on her backside a moment too long. A woman passing by, one of the inn staff, smacked him upside the head with remarkable force. "You don't touch young ladies like that." "Yes, ma'am. Sorry, ma'am." Garrett climbed into the driver's seat, red-faced. Aldrich settled himself, God, this was confusing, into the wagon seat. "I guess Aldrich isn't coming with us today," Garrett said as he took up the reins. "Shut it," she said. "Just drive." "Wow, you sound like my wife already." Aldrich did her best to keep a straight face, but the absurdity of the situation was overwhelming. She was a woman now, a complete, functional woman apparently. And everyone seemed to accept it as though it were the most natural thing in the world. About 50 miles outside Millbrook, dark clouds rolled in. The rain started as a light drizzle, then quickly became a downpour. What Aldrich hadn't realized, what she discovered with mounting horror, was that her sundress became essentially transparent when wet, and she wasn't wearing anything underneath it. Garrett was doing his absolute best not to look, but his eyes kept drifting over, and his smile kept threatening to break through his professional demeanor. "Stop looking," Aldrich hissed. I'm trying not to. Try harder." When they stopped for the first night, Aldrich practically ran into the camping shelter. She tapped the ground with her umbrella, and her dress dried instantly with a wave of magical warmth. A bench appeared for her to sit on, courtesy of the fox's magic. She sat down heavily and glared at the umbrella. "You're enjoying this, aren't you?" The fox remained asleep, but there was definitely a smirk on its silver face. The 3-day journey back was educational in ways Aldrich had never wanted to be educated. The first night, when nature called, she went into the brush as she always had, only to discover that the mechanics of female urination were completely different from what she was used to. She ended up peeing down both legs, soaking her dress and nearly screaming in frustration. When she returned to camp, smelling vaguely fishy and mortified beyond words, she looked at Garrett and said simply, "Shut it. I didn't say anything. Don't." She tapped the ground, and Garrett's dinner appeared. Wild hen in butter and herb sauce, green beans with crispy onions, and a brownie for dessert. Garrett ate gratefully, but could tell that Anna, he'd started calling her that in his head, was not having a good time. By the third day, as they approached Laurendale's gates, Aldrich was seething with frustration. The guards at the gate were checking everyone, looking for the wanted sorcerer. When Garrett's wagon pulled up, they did a thorough inspection. "Where's Aldrich Pemberton?" one guard asked, consulting a list. "Says here he was supposed to be escorting you." "I don't know where he went," Garrett said honestly. "This young lady offered to finish the job when he didn't show up on the day we were meant to return." The guards turned to Aldrich. "Your papers, miss." With shaking hands, she reached into her bag, when had she gotten a bag, and pulled out identification papers. There was also a necklace in there, silver with a name engraved on it. She'd been wearing it without realizing. The name she'd expected it to say was Aldrich. It said Anna. The papers read, "Anna Green Gable, age 19, commoner, House Gabellina." The guards examined them, nodded, and waved her through. Aldrich Anna sat in stunned silence as they rolled into the city. She'd become someone else entirely. Not just in appearance, but in the fabric of reality itself. The paperwork had changed. Her identity had changed. The world had rewritten itself around her new form. At the Adventurers Guild, Helena looked up as Anna approached the desk. Several male adventurers turned to look, their expressions openly admiring. Anna tried to ignore them and presented her quest completion form. "I'd like to turn in this quest." Helena glanced at the paperwork. This was assigned to Aldrich Pemberton. What happened? Anna didn't want to lie, but the truth seemed impossible. He didn't show up the day we were meant to return. Garrett needed an escort, and I offered to complete the job. "And you are?" Anna Green Gable." Helena pulled out the filing system and flipped through. Third file in, exactly where Aldrich's paperwork should have been. There sat Anna's registration. Anna Green Gable, age 19, green eyes, long brunette hair, height 5'11", rank F. "I have you here," Helena said, "and since you completed an E-rank quest successfully," she stamped the papers. "Congratulations, you're now E-rank." "Really?" "As of today." "Well done, Anna." Anna left the guild in a daze and made her way to the Wayward Traveller, only to realize at the door that Anna Green Gable didn't have a room here. She had to rent a new one. The innkeeper gave her a nicer room this time, one with a private bath, something more profitable than the basic accommodation she'd had as Aldrich. "Can't be too careful," the innkeeper said kindly. "Young lady travelling alone and all." Anna thanked her, locked the door, and immediately ran a bath. She undressed, still strange, still uncomfortable, to see this body that wasn't hers, but also was, and sank into the warm water. Her muscles relaxed. The tension of 3 days on the road began to ease. She looked down at the umbrella, propped against the wall. "So now I'm Anna," she said aloud. "What else in this life could go wrong?" Then she caught herself. "Wait, don't answer that." The fox on the umbrella handle started laughing, actually, visibly laughing, rolling onto its back and looking up at her with an evil glint in its eyes, before falling asleep again. Anna stared at it with something approaching terror, because she had the horrible, sinking feeling that her transformation into a woman was just the beginning, and whatever the fox had planned next was going to be so much worse. Chapter 5, in which faces change and identity becomes flexible. Part 2. Anna, still thinking of herself as Aldrich despite all physical evidence to the contrary, spent the next morning cautiously exploring her new existence. Walking in heels required more concentration than she'd expected. The dress kept catching on things, and the way men looked at her on the street was deeply unsettling, not threatening exactly, but present in a way she'd never experienced as a man. She stopped at a cafe for breakfast, and the server gave her a pastry on the house, with a wink that made her skin crawl. "I just want tea," she said flatly. "Of course, beautiful. Coming right up." Anna gripped her umbrella tightly and reminded herself that murder was illegal, even when justified. She spent the afternoon walking through Laurendale's market district, keeping her head down and trying to appear unremarkable. No wanted posters bore her face anymore. They all still showed Aldrich, the male sorcerer with his top hat and cane. She was invisible to the manhunt. Safe. It should have felt like relief, but instead it felt like erasure. By evening, Anna was exhausted, not from physical exertion, but from the constant mental effort of being someone else. Someone new. Someone female. She returned to her room at the Wayward Traveller, locked the door, and drew herself a bath. The hot water was exactly what she needed. She sank into it with a sigh, letting the warmth seep into her muscles, and closed her eyes. Just one day, she thought. One day without something catastrophic happening. She should have known better than to tempt fate. There was a sound, not quite a pop, not quite a whoosh, and suddenly the temperature in the room changed. Anna opened her eyes. King Aldous III stood in the middle of her bathroom, completely naked. They stared at each other for one frozen moment. Then Anna screamed. "Pervert!" she shrieked, grabbing for anything to cover herself. "Get out! What is wrong with you?" The king's face went through several expressions in rapid succession: confusion, horror, recognition of his own state of undress, and absolute mortification. I don't know how," he sputtered, covering himself with his hands. "Out!" Anna threw a bar of soap at him. The king stumbled backward, his foot caught the edge of a rug, and he fell through an invisible threshold, one that opened beneath him without any knock or intention. King Aldous III landed hard on marble flooring. Very familiar marble flooring. He looked up to find himself in his throne room, still completely naked, in the middle of the afternoon court session. Approximately 40 nobles, courtiers, and petitioners stared at him in absolute silence. "Dad!" Princess Celestine's voice cut through the shocked quiet. "Put some clothes on." The king scrambled to his feet, trying to cover himself with his hands, and turned to run for the nearest door. The world shifted again. He stumbled into his royal bedroom, fully dressed in his nightclothes, as though nothing had happened. He stood there, breathing hard, trying to process what had just occurred. He'd been asleep. He'd been dreaming, something about needing to confront someone, about finding answers. And then suddenly he was standing naked in some woman's bathroom while she screamed at him. Then naked in his own throne room. Then here, dressed, as though the past 30 seconds hadn't happened. "That sorcerer!" he roared to the empty room. "Aldrich Pemberton! This is his doing!" His guards burst through the door, weapons drawn. "Your Majesty, we heard shouting. Find that sorcerer," the king said, his voice shaking with rage. "I don't care if you have to tear this kingdom apart stone by stone. Find him. Bring him to me. I want him to suffer for every humiliation, every violation, every—" He stopped, realizing he couldn't explain what had just happened without admitting he'd appeared naked in someone's bath. Again, just like the sorcerer had done to his daughter. "Double the reward," he said finally. 40,000 gold. And spread the word. Anyone harboring him will be executed alongside him. The guards saluted and left. The king sat on his bed and put his head in his hands. That sorcerer was going to be the death of him. Anna sat in her bath, which had gone cold, staring at the spot where the king had stood. "What," she said very quietly, "was that?" The umbrella leaned against the wall, the fox on its handle, sleeping peacefully. But Anna could see the faint tremor of suppressed laughter in its silver form. "You did that on purpose," she accused. The fox's eyes opened briefly, utterly unrepentant, then closed again. Anna climbed out of the bath, dried herself with shaking hands, and got dressed. The sundress from earlier had been replaced, without her noticing, by a simple nightgown that had appeared in the wardrobe. She sat on the bed and tried to think through what had just happened. The king had appeared in her bathroom, naked, which meant the same magic that had been pulling her into inappropriate places was now pulling other people into her space. Or, and this thought was worse, the magic was retaliating. She'd appeared naked in front of the king, so the king appeared naked in front of her. Balance, cosmic fairness, whatever you wanted to call it. "This is getting out of hand," she said to the umbrella. The fox said nothing, but its smirk was practically audible. Anna lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling. She was a woman now. Anna Green Gable, age 19, E-rank adventurer. Aldrich Pemberton had been erased from official records, replaced entirely by this new identity. The wanted posters still showed Aldrich, male, distinguished, wearing a top hat. They were looking for someone who didn't exist anymore. She should feel safe. Instead, she felt unmoored, like she'd lost something essential and couldn't quite remember what it was. Outside her window, the city of Lorendale continued its evening routines. Somewhere in the palace, the king was probably screaming at his advisors about the sorcerer. Somewhere in the castle, Princess Celestine was probably having nightmares about naked men appearing in her chambers. And somewhere in this room, a silver fox was laughing itself silly over the chaos it had orchestrated. Anna pulled the covers over herself and tried to sleep. Tomorrow, she decided, she would figure out how to control this magic properly. How to stop the random teleportations, the unwanted transformations, the constant catastrophes. Tomorrow, she would become someone who understood her own abilities. Tomorrow, she would... The thought drifted away as sleep claimed her. The fox on the umbrella handle opened one eye, looked at the sleeping woman who had once been a man, and appeared distinctly satisfied with the evening's work. After all, chaos was so much more entertaining than order, and they were only just getting started. In the palace, the king sat in his private study, surrounded by his most trusted advisors. The sorcerer, one advisor said carefully, appears to have escalated his campaign of harassment. He's not just targeting the princess anymore, another added. He's targeting your majesty directly. The king said nothing. He couldn't tell them what had actually happened, that he'd appeared naked in some woman's bathroom, that she'd called him a pervert, that he'd been thrown into his own throne room without clothes. It was too humiliating, too impossible to explain. 40,000 gold, he said finally. And I want mages, battle mages, counter-curse specialists, anyone who can track magical signatures. If this sorcerer uses magic, he leaves traces. Find them. The advisors bowed and left. The king sat alone in his study, staring at nothing. Somewhere in his kingdom, Aldrich Pemberton was laughing at him. He was sure of it. He had no way of knowing that Aldrich Pemberton no longer existed, and that the universe's sense of humor was far crueler than any sorcerer could ever be. Chapter 5, in which faces change and identity becomes flexible. Part 3. Anna woke the next morning to find she was Aldrich again. Male, properly proportioned, wearing his original clothes, the ones he'd had when he first arrived in this world. His top hat sat on the bedside table. His cane leaned against the wall, the silver fox sleeping peacefully on its handle. He looked down at himself, patted his chest to confirm it was flat, and let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Thank God, he muttered. He dressed quickly, gathered his belongings, and made a decision. It was time to leave Lorendale. Permanently. The king wanted him dead, the princess was traumatized, and he'd somehow managed to humiliate the entire royal family multiple times over. Staying was suicide. He'd go somewhere remote, a village far from here. Maybe back to Millbrook, where at least the innkeeper understood what he was. He settled his hat on his head, gripped his cane, and headed for the door. He made it 3 blocks before the guards surrounded him. There were at least 20 of them, all armed, all moving with practiced efficiency. They must have been watching the inn, waiting for him to emerge. Aldrich Pemberton, the captain said, his voice flat and professional. You are under arrest by order of His Majesty King Aldous III. Do not resist. Aldrich raised his cane. 3 crossbows were pointed at his head before he could tap anything. Don't, the captain warned. We have mages standing by. Anti-teleportation wards are active. You try your tricks, and we'll put a bolt through your skull before you finish the movement. Aldrich slowly lowered the cane. They bound his hands with iron manacles that felt wrong, cold and heavy, with something inscribed on them that made his skin prickle. Magic-suppressing runes, probably. The cane and hat were confiscated, placed in a sealed box that was locked with 3 different keys. Walk, the captain ordered. They marched him through the streets toward the palace. People came out of their homes to watch. Some jeered, some threw rotten vegetables. Most just stared in shocked silence. The man who'd appeared in the princess's chambers, the sorcerer who'd terrorized the royal family, finally caught. Aldrich kept his head down and walked. The throne room was packed. Nobles filled every available space. Common citizens crowded at the back. The entire court had turned out to witness the trial and execution of the infamous sorcerer. King Aldous III sat on his throne, his face carved from stone. Princess Celestine sat beside him, pale and drawn, refusing to look at Aldrich. "Aldrich Pemberton," the king's voice rang out across the hall. "You stand accused of assault upon the royal person, repeated invasion of private chambers, use of forbidden magic, and crimes against the dignity of the crown. How do you plead?" Aldrich looked up at the king, at the princess, at the assembled crowd. "I never meant any of it," he said quietly. "I didn't know how to control what I could do. Every time was an accident. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry." "Your intent," the king said coldly, "is irrelevant. The harm is done. 27 guards are dead because of you. My daughter has been traumatized. I myself have been subjected to humiliations I cannot even speak of in public. You are a danger to this kingdom and everyone in it." "I know," Aldrich said. "You're right, I am dangerous. I should never have come here." The king stood. "The sentence is death by guillotine, to be carried out immediately in the public square so that all may witness what becomes of those who threaten the crown." They built the guillotine in the square outside the palace. The entire city turned out to watch. Aldrich was marched up the steps to the platform. The executioner, a large man in a black hood, positioned him beneath the blade. The crowd was mostly silent. A few shouted curses. Most just watched with grim fascination. Aldrich looked up at the blade suspended above his neck. It gleamed in the afternoon sun, sharp and final. "This is how it ends," he thought. "Not in London, not in my bed, but here, in another world, for crimes I committed by accident." The executioner checked the mechanism. The blade was ready. "Any last words?" the captain of the guard asked. Aldrich closed his eyes. "I'm sorry," he said again, "to everyone, for everything." The executioner pulled the lever. The blade fell. Aldrich whispered goodbye. The blade should have killed him. It didn't. There was no impact, no pain, no sensation of falling or dying or anything at all. Just nothing. Aldrich waited. Still nothing. He opened his eyes. White ceiling, fluorescent lights, the smell of antiseptic and floor cleaner. He was lying in a bed, a hospital bed, with starched white sheets and uncomfortable pillows and an IV in his arm. "Uncle Aldrich," Timothy's voice, bright with relief. "You're awake. Oh, thank God, you're awake." Aldrich turned his head. Slowly, everything felt stiff and wrong, and saw his nephew sitting beside the bed. Behind Timothy stood others. His sister Margaret, her husband Robert, a few friends from London whose names he couldn't quite remember. "What?" His voice came out as a croak. "What happened?" A doctor entered, checking a clipboard. "Mr. Pemberton, welcome back. You've been unconscious for the past 2 weeks. Quite the scare you gave us." 2 weeks. "You were hit by a postal van," the doctor explained. "Stepped right into traffic on Clerkenwell Road, apparently. The postman did his best to avoid you, but, well, head injuries are tricky things. We weren't sure you'd wake up." Clerkenwell Road, where he'd been standing when he knocked on the pavement with his cane, when he'd said, as a joke, "Send me to another world." "It wasn't real," Aldrich whispered. "What wasn't real, dear?" Margaret asked, taking his hand. "Nothing. I had very strange dreams." "I should think so," the doctor said cheerfully. 2 weeks in a coma will do that. Your brain was quite active, according to the scans, probably processing the trauma." Timothy leaned forward. "We brought you a gift, Uncle. For when you wake up, we clubbed together. Everyone contributed." He gestured to the side table. There, leaning against it, was a cane, Malaysian blackwood, silver handle shaped like a sleeping fox. The exact cane Uncle Septimus had left him, the exact cane that had taken him to another world. Aldrich recoiled. "Get that thing away from me. I never want to see it again." Everyone laughed, the awkward laugh of people who think someone's joking but aren't quite sure. "But we bought you this," Margaret said, confused. "It's a gift. How did you even know it was there? You've been asleep." Aldrich stared at the cane. "I don't know." The doctor made a note. "Probably heard us talking while you were semi-conscious. The mind picks up more than we realize, even in deep sleep." They continued talking, about his recovery, about rehabilitation, about how lucky he was to be alive. Timothy chatted about school, about the isekai novels he'd been reading, about how he'd been so worried. But Aldrich wasn't really listening. He was staring at the cane, at the silver fox on its handle. And as he watched, as everyone's attention was elsewhere, the fox opened one eye, looked directly at him, and winked, then went back to sleep. Aldrich's blood went cold. It wasn't a dream, he realized. It was real. All of it was real. And I'm not safe. I'm never going to be safe. The room continued around him. Margaret discussing discharge plans, Timothy showing him something on his phone, the doctor checking his vitals. But all Aldrich could see was the fox, sleeping peacefully on the cane, waiting. The scene began to pull back, the hospital room growing smaller, the voices fading, the white walls and fluorescent lights receding into darkness. And somewhere in that darkness, very faint, Aldrich could hear the sound of a door knocker. Tap, tap, waiting for him to answer, waiting for him to knock back. Because once you've opened a threshold, once you've learned the courtesy of knocking, you can never truly stop. The doors are always there, and sooner or later, you'll knock again. The fox knew it, Aldrich knew it, and as the scene faded to black, one truth remained crystal clear. This wasn't the end, it was barely the beginning. The end, or is it? Fade to black.